but we're treating this as a societal issue because of the recent outbreak of Lassa fever in Lagos State. Joining us in the Lagos studios, we have, well, he's been on the show a couple of times before he went on AWOL, unofficial. He's a medical doctor and a general practitioner for upwards of 10 years, and he's currently the founder of Recon Health Media, and is also a documentary filmmaker. It's a pleasure to have back on the show Dr. Folajimi Ogundele. Welcome back, Dr. Ogundele.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you back on the show.
Nice to have you here, Doctor. You're looking good, by the way.
Yes, you look good. Okay, so, you know, last week we woke up to the news that Lagos State, you know, was hit, you know, with the Lassa fever disease, even though we know Lassa fever is quite endemic here in Nigeria. But then when Lagos sneezes, you know, the rest of the country catches cold, so to say. You know what that means.
Exactly.
So let's look at Lassa fever. You know, what makes it such a persistent and reoccurring disease condition in Nigeria, especially since we already know everything we ought to know about it? Why is it that persistent, and why does it occur frequently?
Okay, first of all, the first thing we need to mention is that Lassa is caused by a virus. Now, common cold also is caused by a virus. Ebola was caused by a virus, you understand? So I'm sure most of this fear kind of emanates from the Ebola angle. Okay. However, we have organisms around us that actually are like a natural reservoir for this virus. And somehow, because they are always in our vicinity, there's always this communication occurring, which I'm talking about the rats that actually harbor this virus. And by virtue that in some areas, the rats defecate, you have their stool pellets around the place, which could now contaminate food or contaminate the air, which are the two ways by which humans can, you know, get infected by this thing. So that is really where the communication comes in. So because of the sporadic occurrences occur from time to time, because of this existence.
Okay, if I understood you correctly, you said, of course, we all know that Lassa fever is spread through rats, and you just talked about it could also go through the air. Are you saying that it could be airborne, really?
No, you see, when the aerosol pellets actually are dispersed, apart from contaminating food, you could also inhale them.
Okay.
You understand? Yes.
Right.
Wow, that's major. Okay, so this virus, what more should Nigerians really know about this virus?
I don't think there's any reason to panic about it, because a lot of people who get infected don't have symptoms at all. So it's only in very minute cases that you do have people presenting with symptoms, and by 1% or less are those that eventually die from it. So it is really no cause for alarm.
So invariably what you're saying is that it is not deadly. You might have the virus and you might not present with any symptom. Does it make you okay?
Yes, it makes you okay. You might have it. Most of viral infections are self-limiting. They come and they end by itself. Okay. And once you are not symptomatic, you're fine.
All right, so the 80% of cases, you know, that that the people who have it but don't come down with the disease, what is it about them? Is it a genetic thing? What makes them?
Like I said, it's we can't call it a genetic issue. However, you could actually look at your immune system as one being able to help you defend yourself against such infection.
Okay.
Sometimes it could be the strain. Some strains are just like I told you. Common cold could be is viral, you know, in nature. It comes and goes. It doesn't really bother some people anymore. They catch a cold and it's over. Some people could have very mild symptoms and they get over it.
Without any serious implications?
Without any serious implications.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, so, but these symptoms are quite similar to, you know, the very common malaria and other kind of fevers.
Yes,
so
it's said to be an hemorrhagic fever. And it's always, you know, we tell people, most doctors always, if you treat malaria and it doesn't go, you need to have a high index of suspicion for Lassa fever, because that could also be a reason why the person is having a fever, not just malaria. And, you know, because of the predominance or the endemic nature of malaria, that's what we all get to think first, oh, fever, malaria. But if you do treat that person with anti-malaria and they don't get better, you want to look for typhoid fever or Lassa fever. So it's just, this issue might, you know, delay presentation, or it might delay diagnosis. For example, if we had a situation where we didn't have malaria fever, or fever wasn't something that was common.
That common to us.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you know that possibly when you have a fever, you'll be thinking of Lassa straight. And it's very important that people who get infected, who are symptomatic, present very early for treatment.
Very early. Now, let's talk about when you treat someone for malaria and the person doesn't respond to that treatment. How long is this period we're looking at before we determine maybe the person has another kind of thing? Because the incubation period for Lassa fever is actually between 6 to 21 days. That's like 3 weeks maximum. And you can actually treat someone for malaria for that length of time as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. If you look at malaria treatment, you know, whenever they advertise a drug, they tell you if symptoms persist after 3 days, go and see your doctor. So somebody has fever and, you know, has taken an anti-malarial and it really didn't get any result and it goes to the hospital and possibly is admitted. If within 24 hours the fever doesn't subside, then you definitely know it most likely is not malaria.
Okay.
You understand? Okay. But however, some people will, you know, presentation at times for some people is an issue because they'll tell you, oh, I need to go to work, I need to do this. Maybe I'll go to the hospital later.
Yeah.
You know, all those things might cause a delay, but within 3 days, if you take oral anti-malarial and you don't get a result, you should get to the hospital. And if someone is on admission, within 24 hours, if the fever fails to subside, then it's better you think of something else apart from malaria.
What are people who usually have recurring episodes of malaria, or according to them, because they feel it's like a thing about them that almost every other month or 2 months they have to go on anti-malarial drugs. I mean, they take anti-malaria for this month and they feel fine for a while. Then maybe the next month or 2 months again, they now come with another type of fever. Should they have cause to worry?
No, they should not have cause to worry because one thing about malaria fever is that your immunity plays a huge role. If you are undergoing a lot of stress, in fact, when people break down from stress in this part of the world, they break down with malaria symptoms more often than not. Not necessarily they had a new mosquito bite, but because the trophozoite form of it, hides in the liver, and in certain cases just bursts out and comes out in the open. So that could account for the periodic issue of having malaria from time to time. Then there's also the case of malaria drug resistance issues. That also could come in place. But what I'm talking about is a one scenario issue. You treat it once, you don't get result. You get to the hospital, the fever can't really subside after they had you IV antibiotics, IV anti-malaria for 24 hours. Then we begin to think of something else.
Lassa fever, when you get it once and maybe you're treated successfully, does that make you immune to the disease for life, or can you get it again?
Well, we can't really say per se if you mean, like, I said majority of people who have it don't even come down with symptoms. Those that do, they get over. But I don't think research has really given us that much fact. However, there are a lot of viral issues that you have them once, you are not supposed to have them again. Yes.
All right.
It's common with viral issues.
When we talk about Lassa fever, what comes to mind? Another question that comes to mind is that of personal hygiene and cleanliness. Are there some, let's say, particular location or group of people who are more susceptible to falling sick? With
Yes, there is, because, like I told you, you need to have a communication between the rats in the place.
You communicate with the rats. Don't mind it.
More like a negotiation.
Well, I don't know.
You negotiate with the rats.
When they are in the vicinity, in some places they say some rats behave as if they are tenants too.
Yes.
You understand? So when you have such slum, ghetto, where rats are endemic, they are prone to such issues much more than cleaner areas. And rats and refuse are like, wherever you have refuse dump, you see rats going towards that place. So places with poor refuse disposal, places with poor drainage systems, slums are actually prone to have more rats. Definitely, if a breakout will occur, it's usually from these areas.
All right, let's take the conversation to Ibadan for a bit. We have standing by to join us in this discussion a consultant virologist from the University College Hospital in Ibadan, Dr. Adeola Fowotade. Good morning, Dr. Fowotade. Thank you indeed for joining us on the program this morning. Now, let's talk about Lassa fever in Nigeria in the last 5 years. There was an incident in Ebonyi in 2005. There was another incident in 2008, 2011. And according to the Federal Ministry of Health, the number of cases actually peaked in 2012. Here we are again in 2017, and there are cases of Lassa fever across the country, most recent of which is Lagos State. Let's talk about how we are following this progressive report in terms of dealing with the cases, and what are the success story we have to tell as regards Lassa fever.
Morning, thank you for having me in the studio. Like you said, if you look at the trend between 2012 to 2017, there seems to have been like a peak at some point. And even presently, between December 2016 up until presently, we've had about 651 cases and about 105 deaths and it has affected about 18 states. The 2016 was really bad because in all, there were about 26 states affected at that time. And it looks like the trend of the disease is on the increase, and we haven't been able to do much. And this is understandable, considering the fact that if you look at the factors that predispose to having most of these viral infections, particularly the VHFs that have like rodents as their vectors. These rodents are meant to be like animals that are found in the bush. But because of some environmental practices that we have, like bush burning, some of these rodents have moved to peri-domestic area. Now you can find them around homes. And then because there's been a lot of insurgents also, and there has been a lot of movements, a lot of rural to urban migration, such that, and if you also look at it, it's not like we are getting better in terms of environmental sanitation. So this also hasn't helped much. Most of our practices have not, and then also the idea of bush burning or drying food on the shoulder of roads. We have all these practices that are still there. They've not gone away. And so it's difficult to have, take out Lassa fever or even most of these other viral infections from Nigeria as it is. Let's forget about the fact that Lassa fever as it is actually a Nigerian disease. If we recall, it was something that was first discovered in Nigeria as far back as 1969. And between 1969 and even now, we don't seem to have made much improvement in the number of cases of Lassa fever that we have. And yearly, we still continue to have
Okay, I think there's a hitch in the... Okay, we can continue.
all the opportunities that we have into action, like trying to like for instance now we have drugs that we can use to halt the transmission, personal protective equipment that we can use to protect ourselves, and then there's increased awareness on how to prevent the transmission of this disease, particularly among healthcare workers. Now in most hospitals we have isolation wards where patients can be kept so that they could practice barrier nursing to prevent them from spreading the infection from themselves to the healthcare workers, to visitors, or to other patients in the hospital. And then there's a lot of community education also to try to let people be aware of the symptoms of Lassa fever so they could present early. Even though this has not been too impressive, considering the fact that most times people feel that what they have mimics the signs and symptoms of malaria and sometimes signs and symptoms of typhoid fever. So most times we have patients presenting very late. And so this has not helped in terms of patient management, or it has not helped in terms of improving or reducing the number of mortality. Because even the drug that is available, the ribavirin that we have, we know that it helps to cure in about 90% of cases. That's if they present within 6 days of contacting the infection. But most times what we have are late presentation by which time they've already started bleeding. There has been affectation of the liver and some other key organs in the body. So at that point, it's really difficult. No matter what you do, in spite of the drug, most of the patients still succumb eventually. So there's need for awareness on early recognition of symptoms, and also there's need for awareness, for increased awareness on the side of health care workers on recognizing the symptoms and then referring appropriately so that these patients can be cared for in designated referral centers that have been equipped for care of viral hemorrhagic fevers.
Bring one more question to you now before we continue here in Lagos. I know when we talk about treatment of Lassa fever, it is directed at dehydration and, of course, to improve symptoms. But you just mentioned the vaccine, the antiviral medication, ribavirin, which is used to treat it. How accessible, that's one, and of course, how affordable is this particular drug? Do people have access to these drugs?
Yes, it's very accessible, and we don't need to talk about the cost because it's meant to be free. The drugs are supplied by the Federal Ministry of Health, and then they are distributed to the State Ministry of Health, who bring them down to the peripheral health centers. So they are available in most tertiary care hospitals. Even in Lagos, where there was an outbreak, they have access to the drug, both the intravenous ones that you give parenterally and the oral ones that you give to close contacts. Similarly, we have the drugs also being available here in Ibadan as well. But then we still cannot undermine the need for
network issues. We'll get back to Ibadan in the course of the program. Now back to Dr. Ogundele. Now let's talk about Lassa fever and pregnancy, because the first case that was identified in Lagos is actually that of a young lady who had bleeding complications in pregnancy. She later had a stillbirth and then died. You know, how dangerous really does Lassa fever become, you know, in a case of a woman who is expectant? Is the case more severe than someone who perhaps is not in that condition?
Well, you know, illnesses are usually not fair to pregnant women, you understand? And the complication you have in this particular case is kind of odd. The hemorrhagic part of the fever is similar to what you can call internal bleeding.
Okay.
The blood loses its ability to clot. The vessels, which are like the pipes in the system, begin to leak blood internally, you understand? And you know, a baby survives because of the blood supply from the mother to the child.
Yes.
So once that is compromised, the baby will automatically go. Now, being ill in a pregnant woman, in most cases, seems like, oh, it's part of pregnancy. It's part of pregnancy. That also could delay presentation in that particular case. So it's really not favorable. You understand? And there are even some other viral illnesses that can occur in pregnancy that can even lead to congenital problems when the baby comes, or can even lead to stillbirth. So it's not fair. It would be unfortunate for a pregnant woman to come down with such an infection.
But even though it's presented early, are there chances of survival in such a case?
If they present early, they could, you know, it depends on issues. Late pregnancy, early pregnancy, you understand? Those things will determine how you want to manage the treatment. I'm not certain about the side effect of the drug on pregnancy, you understand? But there are a lot of antiviral drugs that are still safe in pregnancy. But if that drug is safe in pregnancy and she presents early, there's a possibility she could carry through. You understand? But if the drug is not safe in pregnancy, or if we look at the fact that, oh, you're not presenting early, or we see early signs that, oh, you might still, you know, be bleeding, that might lead to, you know, compromise of the baby's viability.
Okay, we know that Lassa fever is spread through the rats, but let's understand how it can be spread through person to person and people around infected patients.
Yes, you know, starting with rats, a person gets infected. The infected person can transmit to another person.
Okay. How?
Contact,
okay.
basically.
Just contact.
Contact. You know, you touch somebody, you don't really wash your hands after, or you don't even protect yourself before touching that person, and you go and handle yourself, do some other things, you get it.
Now, let me ask a quick question before we return to Ibadan.
Okay.
Does processing the food, does it kill the virus? Does it denature the virus in any way? For instance, maybe you cook the food that's been exposed to the virus or the feces of a rodent. Does cooking, frying, or whatever form of processing, does it kill the virus?
Heat will denature the protein in the virus.
Okay.
Heat will denature the DNA of the virus, you understand? However, you must also realize that not all foods are cooked or processed. Gary, for example, could just be, they will just put cold water in it and that will be it.
Yeah.
Do you understand? Then you must also talk about the handling of the food itself. Maybe you wash the food and you didn't wash your hand and you touch something else or fed the child. So the food is, in as much as a person can contaminate, a person can infect another person. Handling that food itself
can contaminate a food that is safe.
Yes,
okay.
you take care of the food and your hands are already, not protected, and you deal with another thing. Yes, you cook the food and it ends there, but your hands and whatever you go through gets it. Then I also mentioned that if there is the pellets are there, and it could actually come from aerosol transmission also.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, fine. Let us go back to Ibadan. Dr. Fowotade is still standing by. Doctor, I really want to understand, aside from ribavirin, which is used in the treatment, are we looking at any vaccine in the nearest future?
There have been a lot of research that have been done in the past, and there are still a lot of ongoing researches at this time. And presently, there is even a particular one that has gone as far as animal trials in mice models, and is being set up for the next stage, which is trial among higher primates, like maybe chimpanzees, and then ultimately before the stage of clinical trials. But up until now, as we speak, we still
all right, we seem to be having a bit of a network challenge connecting. Okay, we are going back to Ibadan.
There is a lot of research going on presently to try to get a proper vaccine for Lassa.
Let's talk about resources provided by the federal government, in combating this disease. I mean, from 2005 till now, if you look at all of the reports, you find out that even medical personnel handling these cases always become infected as well. What are the things put in place, really, to safeguard not just the lives of people who have come down with this disease, but also caregivers? What's in place for them?
I think we have to be thankful to the Federal Ministry of Health, at least for the provision of personal protective equipment, which consists of the wood that is meant to cover the head. We have the goggles, we have the scrub suits, we have the impervious gown, the boot covers, the elbow length gloves, and then the other nitride gloves that you have in the package. But we still don't have enough to go around everybody, especially when you talk about several contacts being exposed to a particular case. So there's definitely need for more of the PPE to be supplied. And then also, like we said earlier on, the ribavirin, which is a drug that we have presently for treatment of Lassa fever, is being supplied free by the Federal Ministry of Health, and that has helped in halting the transmission of the virus. And then in most hospitals where we know that persons are most likely at risk of persons that are at risk of Lassa fever would most likely end up like LUTS, like UCH Air. We now have like isolation wards. These isolation wards, most of them were built during the era of the Ebola outbreak in 2014, and they've served the purpose of accommodating so in order to allow for barrier nursing. I think this has to be replicated in more centers. So we still need more of these isolation centers in most other tertiary care institutions. And then apart from that, I know that there's a national task committee that has been saddled with the responsibility of prevention and control of Lassa fever for Nigeria. And they are also playing their role to try to see how they could function better, especially at the Rural Lassa Reference Center.
Network is frozen again. Let's come back to Lagos. We'll go back to Ibadan when they're okay. All right. Maximally, how long does a patient stay being quarantined in the course of treatment?
Well, at least you would, for example, now the doctors that were admitted in Lut had been, they've been discharged.
Okay.
All right. Yes. You can't be too careful. Some people will choose 3 weeks. Some people choose more than 3 weeks. In just observing. Then you have to talk about those who quarantine are those who were symptomatic. They were already showing signs. Then you have to keep them to first of all recover from the illness, and you're sure that they are no longer capable of infecting other people also.
Yeah, you talk about no longer being able to infect other people, but are there any possibility of relapses?
If there's another reinfection, there will be a relapse.
Okay, there could be
There has to be a reinfection.
There has to be a reinfection.
Okay.
Once they are cured after treatment, they are cured. You understand? It's not that it's just going to reoccur again from the blues.
Okay. Then aside from the regular contact and all that, can Lassa fever be transmitted through sexual intercourse?
There is no known, I've not come across any literature stating such, that it could be. But like we said, physical contact alone can transfer it.
And there's no way you don't touch, even during.
So it might not be like an STI pattern. Mere physical contact is enough to actually cause the transmission.
Now, doctor, let's talk about the symptoms.
Okay.
Let's specifically talk about them, what people should know, what they should watch out for. We might think people know, but let's just talk about the symptoms.
Well, the thing that makes it stand out to most people is actually the hemorrhagic part. And what is so obvious at times could be bleeding gums. You understand?
Your gums.
Gums. Because like I said, it's like the whole pipe system in the body begins to leak. Vessels that should have no hole, blood begins to leak out of all these vessels. You understand? So that is really, really what makes it obvious. The fever, like I said, fever is somehow endemic, so the fever doesn't really make it stand out. The body pain, body ache doesn't really make it stand out. But when you begin to notice,
unfortunately,
by the time you notice this bleeding, it's already getting late.
Wow. All right, so you start bleeding from everywhere.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, Lagos is a hygiene-challenged state. You see heaps of waste in almost every street corner. Major parks and all of that. We have a problem with our waste disposal, and that's not undermining the efforts of the government, because they're really doing a lot in that regard. But we as a people just have a very poor, hygiene habit. How do we begin to contain, this kind of a situation with this kind of reality on ground? Where do we start from?
Well, this depends a lot on information at hand. You understand? Okay, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say I come to your neighborhood and I show you around your house, like, okay, from this place on this place, the mosquitoes that are actually coming to your house actually come from these 2-3 areas. After I leave, what would you do to that place? You would want to get rid of it. So there's this lack of awareness, or there's this lack of reality that makes people in their mind connect refuse to danger or refuse to illness. You understand? It's really not, and people treat refuse like refuse, push it away, throw it out of the window. It's none of my business. But we should come to the realization that we all live in a closed circuit environment. What you throw out will come back to you. What you pour in your drainage, what you pour in your gutter will block your drainage and lead to flooding. You understand? So we need to actually have more sense of responsibility. I don't know how the media would do it, but I believe the media has a major role to play, where people will actually come to realize, they should come to realize the fact that, look, this refuse, this unsanitary way of disposing refuse, this throwing things through the door, throwing things through the window, throwing things on the floor anyhow, these things must end. We must consider ourselves responsible for our refuse and responsible for the fact that refuse must be neatly packed and neatly disposed, and not opened or dumped on the street
Or
where
just thrown on the ground.
rodents and roaches,
yeah.
come over it. So it's a community responsibility.
And I think government too needs to do a bit more,
A
because
lot of
sometimes
intervention.
lack of an alternative makes people do certain things. And I know what,
practice.
exactly.
I feel there's always a good alternative, because the
Always.
refuse came from somewhere. For example, let's say I'm driving and the kids are eating things in the car. I have the option of leaving it in the car and disposing it properly, or throwing it through the window. You understand? The refuse came from the house. The refuse didn't fall from heaven. You understand? We packed it out of our houses. So the least you could do is put it in a polythene bag
And tie it up.
tie
You
it.
get rid of it. Okay.
Okay.
Doctor, some 2 years ago when we had the case of Lassa fever in Lagos and some other states, there was a whole lot of sensitization campaign as regards not drinking Gary. I don't know if that should still be a scare right now. And then again, a lot of emphasis was really placed on hand washing. Can you really break it down for us what hand washing really does?
Okay. First of all, scare is not. People getting scared as it doesn't. Okay, people were scared then, doesn't change anything now. You understand? So being afraid of doesn't really solve the problem. Now, hand washing goes a very long way, because most of the time when we contaminate things or things get contaminated, our hands are usually the medium.
Play a role.
Because we touch things. I don't touch it with my face. I won't touch it with my leg. You understand? I won't rub my body, but my hands will be the first thing that would, touch those things. If I want to prepare food, I use my hand. If I want to sweep, I use my hand. If I'm working, I use my hand. So there must be a need for, in practice, what we call universal precautions, how you need to wash your hand. In fact, washing of hand is even an art by itself, where your hand has to be properly washed. And some schools begin to teach their pupils on how to wash their hands properly. The fact is that if you can do that as a habit, not only Lassa, gastroenteritis, issues that cause diarrhea, issues that cause multiple other numbers of infection will be terminated, will be taken care of. Because our hands are usually the medium that transfers this thing from one place to another. And in this part of the world, we still deal a lot with infectious diseases. We deal a lot with diseases that are communicable. And, the art of hand washing goes a very long way.
Yeah,
When you say hand wash, you talked about the proper way of washing hands. Most people might not really know. For the purpose of emphasis, how do you practice safe or the right proper hand washing? Is it by just dipping your hands in water in a bowl and wash, or washing with soap, or run? What exactly is the right way to wash your hands?
We will need to demonstrate that. If we want to do, we need to demonstrate it. But the art is that every part of your hand is washed in a particular methodical way. You understand? If you have a method to doing it, you won't miss out any part. It's only when you do it randomly you could. There are times you tell kids to wash their hand and you come back and say, "Oh, there's
This
a spot
part,
here.
yeah.
There's a spot here." You understand? But because there's a particular method, step by step, I think it's 1 to 7, of doing it. Once you take that up as a habit, and it becomes second nature, you may not even think about it. You'll be doing it that same way over and over. That gives you effective hand washing, not just like it's a ritual. You understand? So that's really the core thing about it. We will need to demonstrate.
But do you
it to
wash
do that.
with soap or just water alone?
No, with soap.
Okay.
You have to wash with soap. I think we need to re-emphasize the importance of washing our hands frequently. When we had the Ebola thing, everybody became very conscious of it.
Hand washing
In
and
fact, going beyond
sanitizers.
into sanitizing. But you can see that practice has gradually died down because people think we're safe. But Lassa fever is here with us now, especially if you're a resident in Lagos State. And that's not meaning to scare you. It's just a current reality. Let's take a quick break. We're still discussing